The mantel had a card leaning wrong, like it had been shoved and forgotten. I reached for it, because the handwriting looked like mine, slanted, small, the way I always tucked an extra loop into the G. The paper smelled faintly of old candle wax and something sweet, like the ginger cookies I burn half the time. My hand stopped. I hadn't meant to write to myself, but there it was. My own name on the envelope. The year in the corner. A line I must have thought someone needed to read. Some stories don't just tell pain. They reveal the truth. This is one of them. Voice of Aunt. That first jolt was a little ridiculous. A grown woman surprised by her own handwriting. But surprise has a sound in me, like the clock skipping a beat. I sat on the edge of the couch with the envelope between my fingers. The tree lights blinked in the window. Outside, a car sighed past. Inside, the house held its breath with me. I remember the letter's weight more than the words at first. Paper holds more than ink. It keeps the small decisions you make when you are tired. I had folded the page carefully, which meant I planned it, at least for a few minutes, before I let the rest of the year push it to the back of everything else. The top edge of the envelope had a faint smudge of flour. I must have sealed it in the kitchen, flour on my thumb like evidence. My neighbour, Emily, appears in my doorway like she always does when winter presses a little harder. She wears a scarf with one end tucked neatly, and she smells of peppermint. She sees the envelope in my lap, and her face softens the way people's faces do when they think they might be the kind of person who can fix things. "You all right, Margaret?" she asks. I don't like when she uses my full name. It sounds younger on her tongue, like permission. "I'm fine," I say. The words come out smaller than the envelope. I consider lying, the kind that makes coffee in someone else's casseroles on holidays, the easy kind. Instead, I tell her, "Found a card. Thought I mailed it last year." I hold the card up like proof. She steps closer, curious, then practical. "Do you want me to hang your wreath for you? My husband's around if you need anything heavy." No. The refusal is quiet, not angry. Protective, maybe. I tuck the envelope under my hand like it's something that could wander away. I'll read it. I thought I had burned it. Reading it out loud is the first decision. It's small, but it matters. It is the kind of thing you do when you want your mouth to remember the sound of your own words. The kitchen light is over the sink. It throws a warm circle on the linoleum that doesn't reach the mantel. I walk that small distance with the envelope and the smell of cinnamon rolls I didn't make, because the oven makes lonely sounds when it's on. The first lines are honest and clumsy. They were meant for my children, which is always funny, because I always pretend I don't know the right words. "To my family," I had written, and then crossed it out, because it felt too grand for an envelope that had my thumbprint on it. I read the crossed-out line aloud, because reading what you didn't mean makes it more real. I remember saying their names softly as if testing them in my mouth. Anna, Tom. The sound of each name is different now. Not broken, but altered, like old silver that's been polished without care. I had not sent them this letter because I thought they were already carrying my little failures in their pockets. Missed calls, forgotten dinners, promises that wore thin. Or maybe I had hoped they would notice without being told. A line caught in my throat, a small, honest demand. "I am here," I had written. Plain. No drama. No accusation. The kind of sentence that sits in a room like a lamp, making everything else visible. Saying it to myself out loud made the house tilt for a moment. Emily listens without interrupting. She nods in the places where my voice trembles and offers a tepid smile when I look up, like someone passing a spare blanket. "You don't have to be alone tonight," she says, turning the words into an invitation that has been softened to fit into a neighbour's hands. I almost refuse. Old habits are stubborn, tucking hurt away, stacking small indignities into a quiet pile. But the letter is stubborn in its own way. It asks for air. I had left it there, perhaps meaning to mail it in a brave, dramatic moment that never arrived. I had left it because I wanted to test my own courage. The test was waiting on the mantel for a whole year. There's a part of me that keeps ledger books in my head. Days I have spent waiting, days they called, days they did not. This year added a neat column labelled Silence. The column has its own weight. Counting things makes them less like ghosts. It lets you hold them like objects, not just feelings. When I finished the paragraph, I wrote about missing a little pair of mittens Anna loved. My voice catches the shape of the memory. A small mitten, red, left on the bus. I had written how lost things accumulate, how you can lose a mitten and later, somehow, misplace a birthday. I laugh softly at my own clumsiness and the ridiculous notion that a mitten is a metaphor. Reading that letter was my first small action, an unromantic rebellion. I could have folded it back and pretended it had never existed. I could have sat by the tree and counted its blinking lights until the sky went entirely dark. Instead, I chose to breathe the paper in and let the letter be an audience for the thing I had kept in my chest. Emily lingers long enough to straighten a throw pillow. "Come by for cocoa?" she offers without pressure. I fold the letter along the crease I had made a year ago. There is a tiny hole made by the staple where I had clipped a recipe inside, a recipe for fruitcake that tasted like regret. I slip the letter into my pocket because there is no other place to put the weight of it. I don't know what I expect. Relief, perhaps. Or a small thunder of confrontation at the door. For now, I have the sound of the tree and the soft creak the house makes when it settles into evening. I have the letter and the memory of placing it there last year with the deliberate patience of someone who still trusted promises. I didn't expect that letter to outlive my pride. The year they forgot me began with good intentions. That's how most forgetting starts. Softly, with a promise no one means to break. I remember their voices that November, bright and hurried through the phone. "We'll see about flights, Mum. It's just the weather and the baby's schedule." They said it kindly, like I was part of a list they'd circle back to when the world settled down. It never does. That December, the house smelled of pine cleaner instead of pine. I'd taken out the artificial tree because dragging a real one alone seemed dramatic. I set the same angel on top, her left wing chipped since Tom was 7. The bulbs blinked unevenly, one dead light pulsing in the middle like a skipped heartbeat. The kettle whistled. I poured tea and forgot the sugar. I do that when I'm thinking about people who aren't coming. The steam fogged my glasses. For a moment, it felt like I'd disappeared too. The clock on the wall ticked like it was chewing the silence. That clock has lived through more Christmases than anyone else. Every tick said, "They might call now." Every tock said, "Not yet." I baked anyway. Old habit. Hands needing purpose when heart doesn't. 2 trays of cookies, one for Anna, one for Tom. I wrapped them with neat red ribbon, wrote little notes, tucked them in a tin box. The tins sat on the counter like small lies, pretending to be gifts, pretending someone would take them. The mailman waved that afternoon. I waved back and pretended I was expecting a delivery. His truck stopped 2 houses down, never here. I went back inside before he could see me waiting. The phone stayed quiet, except for one text from a friend. "Merry Christmas in advance. Doing anything special?" I typed and erased 3 answers. Finally sent, "Just keeping it simple this year." Keeping it simple sounds noble. It really means no one's coming, and I'm pretending it's a choice. That night, I sat with a bowl of soup and the TV on mute. The lights flickered on the window glass, reflecting a version of me that looked busy, almost festive. The silence behind it betrayed me. I thought about calling them, but I had called the last 3 times: birthdays, small news, weather updates. They always promised, "Next time we'll visit longer." So I wrote instead, Small letters. Nothing heavy, just things I would have said if we were around a table. Tom's started with, "Remember when you wanted to be Santa for real?" Anna's started with, "Your father used to hum that carol wrong on purpose." I sealed both. I wrote the addresses carefully, her in Boston, him in Seattle. The pen slipped once, the ink smeared. That smear looked too much like what it was, waiting that's begun to rot. I didn't post them. Maybe part of me hoped they'd call before the post office opened again. The letters stayed on the counter beside the fruitcake, watching the days peel off the calendar. Christmas Eve came quietly. No fanfare. The clock ticked. The cookies went stale. Snow pressed against the window pane, making everything too clean, too still. At some point, I remember whispering into the empty room, "I'm here." Not to anyone in particular, just to the air, to prove it could carry my voice. In the morning, I dressed anyway. Green sweater, pearl earrings. Made 2 extra cups of coffee out of stubbornness. Halfway through the second cup, I laughed at myself. It wasn't bitterness, not exactly. More like seeing the punchline too late. When the church bells rang, I almost went out. Then the air by the door felt too cold, like stepping into someone else's story. I stayed. Hours passed in a shape I can still feel. 11 a.m., hope. 1 p.m., excuses. 3 p.m., certainty. By evening, the lights outside the neighbors' houses came on one by one, a row of belonging. I didn't turn mine on right away. I sat watching theirs instead, each glow another reminder that love is mostly logistics. Showing up, staying late, remembering time zones. Later, when I finally lit my own string, one bulb burst with a faint pop. The smell of burnt plastic filled the air. I didn't move for a while. The quiet after something breaks always sounds bigger than the thing itself. Maybe that's why I started counting. Not the hours anymore. Echoes. The sound of spoons, of wind, of my own breath. I counted how many times the house sighed, how many creaks the floor made before midnight. It became a rhythm, almost comforting. At least something in this house was still consistent. I thought about mailing the letters the next morning. I even put them near my purse. But when sunlight came through the curtains, they looked different. Childish, somehow. Like reminders of a test I had failed long ago. So I tucked them in the mantel drawer. That's where they stayed. That's where one of them waited for me a year later, pretending to be dust, pretending not to hurt. I stopped counting hours. I counted echoes instead. The doorbell rang mid-morning, just as the oven timer started its long sigh. I wasn't expecting anyone. That's the thing about living alone. Every sound feels like an intruder or a small miracle. Through the glass, I saw Pastor James standing with his scarf half tucked and a paper bag under his arm. He had that same polite discomfort people wear when they're not sure if you'll be glad to see them. "Hope I'm not intruding," he said, stepping in when I waved him inside. "Just passing by with donation slips from last month's bake sale." The bag turned out to hold cinnamon bread. His wife's doing, surely. He placed it on the counter like an offering, and I smiled because that's what you do when someone brings you kindness shaped like carbohydrates. The kitchen smelled of butter and sugar. I had been baking too. Not for anyone, just to make the place feel like it had a heartbeat. The 2 scents tangled, almost competing. He looked around, eyes landing on the tins still on the counter, the same ones that had waited untouched last Christmas. Preparing for the holidays? Something like that. My voice sounded casual, maybe too light. I wiped my hands on a towel, the towel that had more flour than fabric by now. He talked about the service that Sunday. Children's choir, candle procession, all the usual things that make small towns feel knitted together. Then, gently, as if testing water, he asked, "You joining us this year?" I shrugged, pretending not to hear the small plea behind it. Maybe. Depends how brave I feel." He laughed softly. "Church doesn't bite, Margaret." "Not the church," I said before I could stop myself. "The people." Something flickered in his eyes. Not pity, thank God. Recognition, maybe. He sat down at the table uninvited but welcome, like someone stepping into silence with both shoes off. "You wrote something," he said, gesturing to the stack of letters half tucked under a calendar. His tone wasn't probing, more like a guess that had already found its answer. I nodded. "Last Christmas. Didn't send them." "Mind if I ask why?" I stared at the flower on my palms. Because I didn't want them to think I was asking for anything. I just wanted to be remembered without having to remind them. He stayed quiet a long time, the kind of quiet that lets truth stretch out and settle. Finally, he reached for his satchel and pulled out a folded paper. "We're doing something new this year. Instead of sermons, we're reading letters. From the congregation, words people wrote but never said out loud, about forgiveness, about loss, about being seen." He paused, watching me carefully. "Would you consider letting me read yours?" The air between us thickened. That letter had been my private ache, the echo I'd chosen to keep caged. The thought of strangers hearing it, my children's names, my quiet admissions, felt indecent, like leaving a window open during a storm. I almost said no, but his face held something steady, a patience that didn't demand. "Maybe," I murmured, "if it fits your sermon." He smiled. "Sometimes the sermon fits the truth instead." The oven timer beeped again. I pulled out the tray. The cookies were uneven, some too brown, some barely done. I stared at them longer than necessary. He didn't move. "You know," he said, "people forget birthdays, anniversaries, even their own prayers. But words written in pain, they wait. Sometimes a whole year, sometimes longer. They wait to be heard." That sentence stayed with me. It sounded like something I might have said once, back when I still believed timing could heal what neglect had broken. When he left, the house felt warmer, not because of company, but because someone had looked at my loneliness without flinching. I stood at the door long after he walked down the path, the cinnamon scent lingering behind him. The snow had started again, soft, light, like forgiveness, pretending to be weather. Later that evening, I read the letter one more time. The words didn't sting as sharply, maybe because I wasn't reading to myself anymore. I was rehearsing, though I didn't know it then, for a kind of release I hadn't imagined possible. I slipped the letter into a new envelope. Fresh paper, same handwriting. This time I didn't write a name on it, only the word, "for reading." It felt like leaving a key under the mat. If he took it, fine. If he didn't, fine. Either way, I'd opened the door a crack. Before bed, I made tea and stood by the window. The street lamp light hit the snow, turning it into small sparks. For the first time in a long time, I didn't dread Christmas. I just waited for it, quietly, the way people wait for morning after a long storm. The letter was still on the counter when I turned off the light, the corner lifting a little from the draft, as if it were breathing. "Would you forgive them if this happened to you?" I said yes, before I knew what it would cost. The morning started in that pale half-light that makes snow look alive. I watched it move across the window like it had somewhere to be. The house was quiet enough to hear the soft creak of the tree branches outside, the same rhythm the house has known every December. I almost didn't go. My coat hung by the door for 10 minutes while I stood there holding my gloves, thinking of reasons not to. I told myself the letter wasn't important, that Pastor James had probably found something better to read. I told myself no one would notice if I stayed home. But there's a moment when the stillness starts to ache, when even silence feels heavy in your lungs. That's when I stepped out. The church bell was already ringing, the sound carried through the snow like warm breath. People's voices floated in the air, the soft chatter of coats being unbuttoned, children giggling near the steps, someone humming a hymn too early. Inside, everything smelled of pine and candle wax. The pews were half full, the choir gathering near the front, the pastor moving quietly between rows, shaking hands, offering smiles. He caught sight of me near the doorway and nodded, nothing more. No words, just that small nod that said you came. I sat near the back. Always safer there. The hymn books felt smooth and cold under my palms, pages slightly curled from years of fingers and winters. The wooden pew beneath me creaked in small protests every time I shifted. That sound, the old wood, became my anchor. The choir started. Their voices rose and wove through the rafters. I could feel the vibration in my chest, like memory disguised as music. Then the pastor stepped to the pulpit, his paper folded neatly in his hand. He began with the usual blessings, the thank yous, the stories of charity drives and food baskets. People nodded, smiled, the kind of calm approval that fills small churches. Then he paused, long enough for the room to change shape. "This year," he said, "we wanted to share letters, honest words, not polished prayers, not perfect stories, just truth from among us." My hands went cold even before he unfolded the page. He didn't say my name. Thank God. He didn't even glance my way. But I knew that paper. The faint tear near the fold, the crease too sharp at the edge. He started reading. "To the ones who forgot me at Christmas." That first line cut through the air, soft but steady. I felt it leave his mouth and find me. Around me, the shuffling of coats stopped. The air went still. I know life gets busy. Children grow, schedules tangle. I tell myself it isn't malice, just distance. But sometimes, silence feels like its own language, and I've been fluent in it for a while now. The sound of those words outside my own head, it was strange. They felt heavier and lighter, both at once. I could see faces turning toward him, toward the letter. Some nodded faintly, others looked down. Nobody looked back at me. Not yet. He went on. "Last Christmas, I baked cookies no one came to eat. I lit a tree that blinked into an empty room. I wrote your names anyway, because that's what mothers do. They keep writing love, even when there's no reply." Someone in the front sniffed quietly. I felt my throat close, but not from shame, from release. When he reached the last paragraph, his voice gentled even more. "I am not angry. I am just here. If you ever find your way home again, I promise there will still be light in the window. Not because you deserve it, but because that's how love stays alive." He folded the paper slowly, like it might crumble if rushed. No applause, no noise, just the sound of the choir breathing behind him. Across the aisle, a woman dabbed her eyes. A man coughed into his hand, trying to hide that his face had gone soft. And then, almost unnoticed, the back door creaked open. I turned, and for a split second, thought my mind was playing with me. Anna? Standing there with her scarf still around her neck, snow in her hair, her husband behind her, awkward, guilty. She hadn't seen me yet. They slipped quietly into the far pew, heads bowed as the pastor spoke again about forgiveness, about how some words mend things we didn't even mean to tear. I couldn't breathe properly. My heart had gone stubborn, beating too hard and too slow at once. When the choir sang again, I just stared at the pulpit. The letter was gone now, folded and resting near his Bible. But its echo stayed. I could feel it circling the room like a second kind of air. People smiled at each other differently after that reading, softer, aware. Some touched the hands beside them. Some just sat still, as if they'd heard something they couldn't unhear. And me? I just watched the candle flicker near the altar, its flame tilted one way, then another, steadying itself every few seconds. I thought, that's what survival looks like. I didn't move when the service ended. People filed out slowly, whispering their goodbyes, their Merry Christmases. Anna brushed past the aisle near me, her eyes landing briefly on my face. Recognition bloomed there. Shock first, then something else. I looked away, pretending to fix my coat. The wooden pew beneath me creaked again. My anchor sound. Some truths sound kinder in a stranger's voice. The church emptied the way a tide pulls back. Slow, uncertain, leaving bits of silence in the cracks. I stayed where I was, one hand on the back of the pew, breathing in the faint scent of pine and candle smoke. My legs felt stiff, my heart louder than the hymn that had just ended. When I finally looked up, they were still there. Anna near the side aisle, half hiding behind her husband's shoulder, and Tom, standing by the doorway. I didn't notice him at first. Maybe I didn't want to. But that shape, that hesitation before taking a step forward, that was my boy. The same way he used to hover before admitting a lie when he was little. He had grown into someone else. Lines around the eyes, the weight of his own family maybe. But guilt, that looks the same at any age. The cold draft slipped through the half-open door, brushing past my ankles, smelling of wet snow and road salt. I kept staring at it, pretending I needed to fix my scarf, anything to delay whatever was about to happen. I didn't expect them both, not together, not today. Anna was the first to move. She walked toward me, small steps, the kind people take when approaching a wound. I watched her lips part, close, part again, the start of an apology that couldn't find a sentence. I could have made it easier for her, said her name, opened my arms, something cinematic, but my body refused the script. I just looked at her, waiting for my heart to choose between anger and mercy. She spoke first, voice low, breaking. I didn't know he'd read it. Neither did I, but that didn't matter now. I saw how her eyes glistened, not with performance, but with that kind of shame you can't decorate. She wasn't crying for the letter. She was crying for all the small ways she'd stopped calling, for the texts that never sent, for the empty chair that used to be a home. "I'm sorry," she said finally. Just that. No explanation, no excuses. I nodded. Not as forgiveness, not yet, but as acknowledgement. A simple "I heard you." Tom came closer then. His voice was rougher, older somehow. "You could have just called, Mom." The words hit harder than he meant. I caught the tremor underneath, the defensive love of a man who still feels like a boy when he disappoints his mother. "I did," I said softly. "You didn't answer." He opened his mouth, then closed it. The silence between us filled with all the years we'd both pretended were fine. The pastor passed by on his way out, gave a small smile, and a nod I didn't fully return. The door closed behind him with a slow sigh. Now it was just us, our breath clouding faintly in the cool air, the echo of the last carol still hanging in the rafters. Anna sat down beside me. Her hand found mine, tentative. Her skin was colder than mine, maybe from the walk, maybe from nerves. "I heard your voice," she whispered. When he read it, I knew it was you before the second line. That caught me off guard. How fast she'd known. Maybe blood recognizes confession faster than logic does. "I didn't mean for you to hear it," I admitted. "Not like that." "But we needed to," she said. "I think we needed someone else to make us listen." Tom was still standing. His eyes darted between us, restless, ashamed, searching for footing. "You think I don't feel bad?" he asked, his tone rising, that defensive edge again. "I thought you had people here. The church, your friends. I didn't know—" I stopped him with a look. Not harsh, not soft, just enough to make him breathe again. You knew, I said quietly. You just didn't want to look at what it meant. He froze, then sat beside Anna. The three of us sat like strangers who remembered the same story differently. The candles near the altar burned low. Their wax dripped slowly. Quiet little reminders that even fire tires out eventually. No one said anything for a while. And maybe that was the first honest conversation we'd had in years. I glanced at Anna's scarf, still speckled with snow. You didn't have to come, I said. She shook her head. We did. And that was the beginning of something small, but real. When they stood to leave, I didn't stop them. I just told them there was tea if they wanted to come by later. Not an invitation. Not exactly. More a lifeline tossed gently into cold water. They both nodded. Tom hesitated at the door, looked back once. His lips moved. I think he whispered, "Love you," but the words drowned in the creak of the hinge. The church emptied completely. I stayed behind, watching the snow swirl outside the stained glass windows. Each flake caught a bit of colour, red, blue, gold, then disappeared against the white. I thought about that letter again, how I'd written it to remind them of me. But what it really did was remind me of them. The parts of them that still tried, that still flinched at the sound of truth. Outside, the bells started again, announcing another service somewhere else, maybe for someone luckier. But I didn't feel unlucky anymore, just quiet. As I stepped out, the cold hit my face, sharp and real. I pulled my coat tighter, not from chill, but from the strange warmth rising inside me. The warmth of having been seen, even if it hurt. Snow crunched under my boots. Behind me, the church door closed with a soft thud. Ahead, 2 sets of footprints led down the path. I followed them slowly, step by step, not to catch up, just to stay in the same direction. Silence had raised them better than my words ever did. The morning after felt different before I even opened my eyes. There was sound, soft, clinking, hushed movement, the kind of noise houses forget how to make when they've been too quiet for too long. For a second, I thought it was memory playing tricks, but when I sat up, I smelled coffee. Fresh, not instant. The kind that fills corners of a room you'd stopped noticing. Through the crack in the door, light spilled from the kitchen, golden, alive. And there they were. Anna, her hair tied up, wearing my old apron. Tom, awkwardly holding a spatula, his sleeves rolled to the elbows like he was trying to look useful. No big speeches, no teary greetings, just there. And somehow, that there was louder than all the apologies in the world. I didn't say anything right away. I stood by the doorway, letting them fumble around like 2 children pretending they knew what they were doing. Tom's toast was burning. Anna was humming a carol out of tune. It was chaos. Beautiful, ordinary chaos. "Morning?" I said softly. Both of them froze. Anna turned first, the smallest smile spreading across her face, cautious, as if it needed permission to stay. "Coffee's ready," she said. "And I tried your recipe for eggs. I think I used too much butter." "You can never use too much butter," I replied, walking in. My voice didn't shake this time. Tom looked up, scratched the back of his neck. "We, figured we'd stay a bit. Flights got delayed." We all knew flights hadn't gotten delayed. But the lie was gentle, the kind meant to save dignity, not hide truth. I let it live. The 3 of us sat at the table, the same table that had seen birthdays, arguments, homework nights. The same one that had held that letter a year ago. The difference now was the sound, forks against plates, the scrape of chairs, breathing that wasn't just mine. Church was, Tom started, then stopped. Different. "Good different?" I asked. He nodded, Hard different. I smiled, half to him, half to myself. Sometimes those are the same thing. Anna reached across the table, brushed a crumb off my sweater. A small, motherly gesture, the kind children start doing when they finally see time on your face. I didn't know you felt like that, she whispered. You weren't supposed to, I said. Not through a stranger's voice. She shook her head. Maybe that's why it worked. We couldn't ignore it when we heard it from someone else. There was a silence then, not the heavy kind from before, but something softer, like the pause between verses of a song. Outside, snow kept falling. Not thick, not wild, just steady, patient. It caught the morning light and turned everything silver. We cleaned up together. Tom washed dishes, humming under his breath. Anna dried them. I pretended not to notice how she kept glancing at me, like checking I wouldn't vanish if she looked away too long. Afterwards, Tom fixed the light above the sink, the one that had been flickering for weeks. I watched him reach up, tall, clumsy, still my boy. There, he said, switching it on. The bulb steadied. The hum of electricity filled the air. It's strange how repair can sound like forgiveness. Later, we sat in the living room, the same couch, the same tree, but the air had shifted. The old blinking lights cast gentle reflections on their faces. Anna pointed to the angel on top, still chipped, and laughed. I can't believe you still have that thing. Some things don't need fixing, I said. Her eyes softened. Maybe some people too. Tom leaned back, hands clasped. You think the pastor knew what he was doing? Probably, I answered. Pastors usually do, but maybe it wasn't about what he knew. Maybe it was about what I finally stopped hiding. The truth of that sat quietly between us. We didn't talk about the lost years. No one made lists of missed birthdays or unanswered calls. Some stories don't need retelling when everyone already knows how they hurt. Instead, Anna started talking about her daughter's school play. Tom told me about his new job. I listened, nodded, laughed once or twice. My heart stayed still, content just to be part of the noise again. As afternoon slipped in, they helped me decorate what was left of the tree. The old ornaments clinked softly against each other, tiny ghosts finding new places to hang. At one point, Anna found the small wooden reindeer Tom had carved in 5th grade. Its leg was cracked. She placed it near the middle anyway. Perfect, she said. When I finally sat down, I saw the scene as if from far away, the glow of lights, their voices overlapping, coffee cups half empty, snow dusting the windows. It looked like forgiveness, but quieter. I realized something then. The letter hadn't punished anyone. It had freed me. For a year, I'd been holding on to silence like armor, mistaking it for strength. But strength, I learned, is softer than that. It's knowing when to speak, and when to let the echo do the rest. The clock on the wall ticked, steady, gentle. The same sound that once mocked me now felt like company. When evening came, they both stood by the door, bundled up again. Anna hugged me first, tight, her cheek against mine. We'll come by next week, she said. I didn't correct her. I didn't say, you've said that before, because this time I believed she meant it. Tom hesitated a second longer. That letter, he said, was brave. I smiled. No, it was just honest. That's rarer. They left with the smell of cinnamon and snow clinging to them. I watched their car lights fade down the street until all that was left was the quiet hum of winter. I turned back to the kitchen. The coffee pot was still warm. I poured a small cup, sat by the window, and watched steam curl upward. The same cup from last year, same chipped rim. Only now, the air around it didn't feel empty. The street outside shimmered with reflection from Christmas lights. Some houses were brighter, some dimmer. But for once it didn't make me ache. It just looked alive. I thought about the letter one last time. How it began with pain and ended in peace. How I'd written it to be heard, but in the end, it was me who finally listened. I stayed silent. But the truth found its voice. Stories like this never fade. Voice of Aunt. I didn't win anything. I just stopped losing myself. Some wounds close when we stop waiting. That's peace enough.